The story of Balto. If you've seen the animated movie, you already know what happens. An epidemic is occurring live time, and there's a rush to travel hundreds of miles over the frozen land to bring the serum to Nome to save the lives of dozens of children. The serum begins the relay hundreds of miles away in a wood box on a sled. The dogs pulling the sled become lost in a storm. Their musher hits his head, the sled cracks through the ice and nearly falls off a cliff. And if it wasn't for Balto, a dog who was part wolf, the serum would never have made it. But as most retellings are, dramatics play a huge role, and the truth becomes buried in what we think we know and what we remember of those retellings. So buckle up, because Balto, while he indeed was the lead dog that brought the serum into Nome, he was only a fraction of the story. And the story does not end there. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. I am your host, Kayla.
And it's me, Sam. Again. Wahoo!
Woohoo! You didn't...
Or ahoo! As a wolf would.
Nice.
I tried. That wasn't very good.
We should have gotten Autumn.
Yeah.
Get her going. So a few housekeeping things first. Those of you who follow me on Instagram, I posted a few stories where you could vote on options for added benefits for Patreon and Apple subscribers, and I will be working on those in the next couple of months. But I have a request, because I have a few Apple subscribers and I cannot see who you are. Do you know if there's a way to figure out who your Apple subscribers are?
No.
Okay.
It's probably... Apple is pretty big on privacy things, so...
Okay.
Probably not.
Sam does a lot of things with Apple and apps and whatnot, so that's
like any sane, civilized person.
Anyways, Apple subscribers, I know there's a few of you out there. I don't know who you are. I cannot find out who you are. I would like you to be able to receive the same benefits as Patreon members, and I cannot do that unless you reach out to me. So send me an email, tragedywithAview@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me on social media. I'll figure out how to go about authenticating your membership and whatnot when you reach out to me. But
what are some of these benefits?
I would really like everyone who pays for a subscription with me to be able to receive. I'm going to be doing monthly shout outs for new members. Probably won't do those every episode unless I end up having like a huge influx. Then, I'll split them up. But I'm thinking like maybe at the beginning of the month, I'll shout out everyone who's signed up. Then you're going to get free stickers. And if you are an Apple subscriber or in the $4 tier for Patreon, you're going to get a t-shirt after a year of membership. So some things are coming. That's not happening yet. I need to figure out what sort of design I want to go with for the t-shirt, because I want it to be something that's like very clearly
branded.
Not necessarily branded, but I want it to be known that you earned the shirt through your dedicated membership. You didn't buy it. So I'm trying to figure out
You're trying to give them that drip.
I'm going to cut that out.
Why? It's funny.
What drip are you talking about?
It's like your threads.
I am not 12.
Like your swag.
Okay. Anyways, moving on.
If I keep talking about it, she can't cut it all out.
Along with that, I'm going to work on getting new t-shirts and whatnot designed and do a pre-order on those in, again, the coming months as time allows for me. So be on the lookout, tell your friends, leave us a review, and on to the story, which a little bit of the backstory here. I started researching a story that we will be talking about in the next episode. But in order to get to that story, I had to research the background of the story, which led to the 1925 serum run. And thus, this story rolled out because there's information that I didn't know about.
The diligent researcher, Kayla, is doing all she can for our wonderful listeners.
I would like to tell you some history. It's not quite in line with the normal stories that we do, but it's a really good story. It's a really crazy story when you think about it too. So dog sledding has been around since at least 6000 BC, and we can date it back to this far because dog harnesses have been found with dog remains in Siberia, and those have been dated to 7800 to 8000 years ago. In addition to this, based on items found and histories that have been passed down, it can be concluded that Native American cultures used dogs to pull loads. The dogs on the team include leaders or lead dogs, swing dogs, team dogs, and wheelers or wheel dogs. Lead dogs are at the front and are responsible for following directional cues to lead the rest of the team and set the pace. And these leaders may be a single or a pair of dogs. And at times, the leader or leaders are free from the sled and the line to be able to better find a trail for the rest of the team. However, this is pretty unusual and is not allowed at races like the Iditarod.
Makes sense.
Like many people who have dogs for work reasons, the personality is very important. Some of the qualities for a lead dog are intelligence, initiative, common sense, and the ability to find a trail in bad conditions. Swing dogs or point dogs are directly behind the leaders, and they help to steer and steady the rest of the team behind them in turns and curves on the trail. The team dogs are those between the wheelers and the swing dogs, and they add power to the team. And while smaller teams may not have dogs in this particular position, the term can be used to describe any dog on a dog team. And then we finally have the wheel dogs, and they are the nearest to the sled and the mushers. And a good wheeler must have a relatively calm temperament, so that way they are not startled by the sled moving just behind it. They have strength, steadiness, and the ability to guide the sled around tight curves, and similar to how a musher may look for the qualities in a lead dog. So the lead dog's qualities are super, super important. The wheeler dog's qualities, personality qualities, super, super important. Why can't I get my words out?
Did not know there was different types of dogs.
Yeah, so it's basically just they have different jobs, and you can train them to do their job, and their personality plays a role in how well they do at that job.
See, this reminds me of there was this movie about a dentist that moves to Alaska.
Snow Dogs.
Snow Dogs? Have you watched it?
It's one of the few movies I've watched, yeah.
Good.
If there's a dog in the movie, I've probably watched
Snow
it.
Dogs, and then at the end he's like, or the old gruff guy was like, in order to control your dog, you gotta bite their ear. And then at the end he bites the dog's ear, and the guy was like, I was just kidding, you're an idiot.
But it worked.
Yeah, but it works. It was funny.
Yeah. So
It's classic. Get out there and go watch it.
Yeah, speaking of dog movies, a movie that applies here, and we will get into it quite a bit. Do you remember watching Togo with me? You're blinking very fast.
No.
Is
that live action?
I
don't think I ended up watching it, but it was on.
It was the movie where the guy had the dog and he kept trying to get rid of it, and he
I didn't
finally
watch it all the way through.
well
I know what you're talking about.
well anyways, so I will share a picture on social media, but the actor that they pulled for that movie
It's from Spider-Man.
looks very, very much like the actual person that he was portraying in real life.
That's true. It's that brow.
Yeah,
It's eyebrow
the
line.
the
It's
brow
very strong.
and the mouth,
like his mouth,
shape
yeah.
and the forehead shape, and they styled his hair well. And anyways, during the 1925 serum run to Nome, 20 mushers and 150 sled dogs relayed the diphtheria antitoxin 674 miles or 1,085 kilometers by dog sled across Alaska in 5.5 days, and therefore saved the city of Nome and the surrounding communities from an epidemic.
Wait, are you saying gnome like garden gnome?
Nome. It is a town in Alaska.
Gnome. So not gnome like garden gnome.
Not like a garden gnome.
Okay.
So this would then pave the way for the Iditarod, which we can still see held today. But the mushers and the dogs were portrayed as heroes in newspapers across the United States. However, it was Balto, the lead sled dog on the final stretch into Nome, that became the most famous dog of all of the teams. But in reality, it was Togo's team which covered the most dangerous parts of the route and ran the farthest. Togo's team covered a total of 261 miles or 420 kilometers, whereas Balto's team ran 55 miles or 89 kilometers.
Like nothing. You didn't run anything.
Yeah. Well,
240 miles
I'll
in
give
less
my-
than 5 days. How many days did he run?
we will talk about it.
Okay.
We're going to go through it, but I'm going to give you my theory at the end of why Balto had the spotlight, essentially.
He's got a cool name.
He does have a cool name. So in December of 1924, several days after the last ship left port, Dr. Curtis Welch, who was the only doctor in Nome, was treating a few children for what he first diagnosed as tonsillitis, initially dismissing diphtheria as a possibility because he thought that he would see more familial patients because of how contagious it was, and there just weren't very many family members coming in with the same complaints. Unfortunately for Dr. Welch, the antitoxin he had expired, and the port froze over before being able to deliver a new shipment of the antitoxin. But again, he wasn't worried. After 4 children died in the following weeks, he began to fear that it really was diphtheria.
Okay. You're using the word antitoxin?
Yes.
What is the difference between an antitoxin and like an antidote or antidote, or like why is it called a toxin? Is this a disease? Virus?
We're going to talk a little bit more about it, but there's the illness is caused by bacteria that releases toxins.
Oh.
So you have to battle those toxins.
With other toxins. That's usually how it works.
Yeah. I mean,
I think.
rattlesnake bites are a good example of that you pull the poison from the snake to treat it. Anyways, in mid-January of 1925, Dr. Welch had officially diagnosed the first case of diphtheria in a 3-year-old boy who died only 2 weeks later. The day after he diagnosed the boy, a 7-year-old girl came in with the exact same symptoms, and the doctor decided to attempt to administer some of the expired antitoxin to see if it might still have any effect, and sadly, the girl passed away. Realizing that diphtheria was in fact in Nome and it was spreading, Dr. Welch ordered a quarantine be issued, and the following day, on January 22nd, Dr. Welch sent telegrams to all of the major towns in Alaska, alerting them to the public health risk.
So, just to confirm, this is only hitting children?
I think it's mostly affecting children
Oh.
because they don't have the same.
Developed immune system?
Yeah, their immune systems are just weaker in general. So because I had no idea what diphtheria was, diphtheria at a basic level is a contagious bacterial disease that causes inflammation or swelling to the nose, throat, and windpipe. The bacteria, I'm probably going to butcher how you say this name, but the bacteria is Corynebacterium diphtheriae, and it produces toxins that cause the inflammation, and these toxins will kill healthy tissue in a person's respiratory system, and that's why it's so deadly.
Sounds worse than COVID.
I think it is worse than COVID. So diphtheria can be passed much like any other respiratory virus where you come in contact with droplets from an infected person, mostly through coughing and sneezing. Sounds like COVID.
You're going to get us banned. I'm going to get us banned.
The toxic bacteria, once it enters a person's circulatory system, causes tissue to swell and will result in organ damage, heart and neurological complications, paralysis, suffocation, and suffocation becomes the most common cause for death in those that have diphtheria.
It sounds horrible.
It is. It is. So on January 24th of 1925, a meeting of the Board of Health was held where Superintendent Mark Summers of the Hammond Consolidated Goldfields proposed a dog sled relay using originally 2 teams. They decided this because with the port frozen over, there would be no way a ship could deliver the antitoxin until the waters thawed in the spring. And this was in the 1920s. Planes were not yet trusted to fly in.
Howard Hughes hadn't done his job yet. Maybe. Aviator. Leonardo DiCaprio.
Howard Hughes?
Yeah.
Who's Howard Hughes?
He did planes. Also, speaking of, so the diphtheria. So this is something that had been like cured already?
An antitoxin was created to cure people with diphtheria. Yes, it was known about and treatable with the antitoxin.
You wouldn't know who he looks like, but
I don't, how is he
he's
significant?
an American aerospace engineer who was like one of the first people to fly.
What about the Wright brothers?
I said one of the first people to fly.
Yeah, but like, okay.
Continue.
Anyways, it was the 1920s. Planes were not yet trusted to fly in the frigid weathers of Alaska, much like we talked about a few episodes ago with the World War II plane that crashed into the mountainside.
Oh, yeah.
There was an emergency stock of antitoxin in Anchorage, Alaska, which would travel 330 miles or 531 kilometers to Nenana, which is in central Alaska. So it's going from like the southern part of Alaska up to central. And from here, it would be left to dog sled teams. One was going to start in Nenana, Alaska, which is the closest place to a railhead in the Alaskan Railroad. And the other would start in Nome, which is near the coast, kind of slightly, it's west, but slightly north of Nenana.
I'm remembering another movie. It's Remember the Titans, or it's a football movie.
Yeah. I've also seen that movie.
Wow.
I've seen
2 for
two.
2.
Woo!
Actually, you're 2 for 3 because The Aviator is another movie.
Oh, well.
I haven't even seen that movie.
Okay, so the route that was going to be taken by the dog sled teams is considered an ancient network of trails that is laid out by the natives in the area. By 1925, the trail was so often used that it had cabins that were set up every 20 miles or so, so that mushers could stop and rest and get out of the elements and
That
into the warmth.
sounds familiar.
The two teams would mush towards each other and meet roughly at the halfway point in the town of Nulato, and the trip from Nulato to Nome, under normal circumstances, where they were not running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, takes 30 days to travel the distance.
30 days.
It was estimated that the serum would last only 6 days in the brutal cold and blistering storms of the Alaskan winters. Because of this, specific teams were being used who had a history of traveling very far, very fast. To find these teams, a telephone relay and let me back up. So after some concern was raised about only 2 people going to relay the serum from
Two
point
legs.
A to point B, they decided they needed to have more mushers. So a telephone relay and telegraph system were used to ask for volunteers along the entire route. Several men stepped forward, some who were mail delivery mushers and others who were lifelong participants in the mushing industry. The temperatures across Alaskan interior were at 20-year lows due to a high-pressure system from the Arctic. Fairbanks, in particular, was reading temperatures as low as negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 46 degrees Celsius. Winds were blowing at speeds of 25 miles per hour or 40 kilometers per hour, and snow, of course, had covered Alaska and were building drifts that were 10 feet or 3 meters tall.
It's actually interesting because you would think that the cold, like they freeze stuff all the time. You think that the cold would actually like preserve it rather than it being...
So apparently it can freeze for a short period of time before it starts to kill the bacteria.
Oh.
And once it starts killing that bacteria that's in the antitoxin, it's
Then
no
it becomes
longer
useless.
Yes. So the first musher in the relay from Nenana to Nulato was nicknamed Wild Bill, and he was handed the 20-pound or 9-kilogram package of antitoxin that was wrapped in animal furs at the train station in Nenana on January 27th at 9 p.m. Despite a horrific temperature, Wild Bill left immediately with his team of 9 dogs led by Blackie. The temperature began to drop and the team was forced onto colder ice of the river because they found that the trail had been destroyed and they were no longer able to follow it. Despite jogging alongside the sled to keep warm, Wild Bill developed hypothermia by the time he reached Minto at 3 a.m. He arrived with parts of his face black from frostbite, and he was informed that he missed the next person because Edgar Calland, who was the next person in the relay, arrived in Minto the night before Wild Bill arrived, and he was sent back to Tolovana.
Like backwards?
They were meeting in Minto
Uh-huh.
because I'm going
So
to...
which way did he go? Did he go back the way he came, or did he like go, oh, you need to go get it instead?
No, he went back the way that he came.
Why wouldn't he just wait?
I don't know.
Okay.
That's a good question. But he was sent away. The temperature was negative 62 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 52 degrees Celsius.
Chilly.
And after warming the serum by the fire and resting for 4 hours, Wild Bill dropped 3 dogs who were clearly suffering from the cold and left for Tolovana. And he ended up traveling a total of 52 miles. So Wild Bill and his team arrived in Tolovana in bad shape, and he got there about 11 a.m., which was only 4 hours later. Wild Bill handed over the serum to Calland, Again, after warming the serum in the roadhouse, Caland headed into the forest. The temperature had warmed slightly to negative 56 degrees, or negative 56 degrees Fahrenheit, or negative 49 degrees Celsius, causing Caland's hands to freeze to the sled's handlebars.
Whoops.
And it required the owner of the Manly Hot Springs Roadhouse to pour boiling water on the birchwood handlebars in order to thaw his hands from the handle.
That seems like really bad.
That seemed like the thought of my hand freezing to something makes me very, it gives Christmas Story vibes, except with
3
your
for 4.
hands.
You're killing it tonight.
Woo! So from Manly Hot Springs, the serum passed through at the Baskin hands before George Nollner delivered it to Charlie Evans at Bishop Mountain on January 30th at 3 a.m. The temperature had again dropped to negative 62 degrees Fahrenheit, or negative 52 degrees Celsius, and it was continuing to drop. So at this point, they're at roughly 2 days and 6 hours in to this relay, and it had already passed through 5 people's hands. Charlie Evans relied on his lead dog when he passed through ice fog where the Koyukuk River flowed into the Yukon. Listen, some of these names, even though I've written down the pronunciation.
Try it again.
Koyukuk.
Sure.
Koyukuk River. I could be butchering it. I could have found a pronunciation that
You're a
was
chef.
just messing with me. That's my biggest fear, is that the pronunciation that I'm finding is somebody who's I'm gonna mess with everyone out there.
That would be pretty sinister.
That would be awful, and I'm so sorry if that's the person that I believed, because sometimes I do stupid things like that. But anyways, here they broke through the ice, and Evan's dogs had short hair, and he had mistakenly forgot to put on a protective layer of rabbit skin that protected his dog's groins, and shortly after, both of his dogs collapsed. So he had 2 dogs attached to his sled. At 10 a.m., Evans arrived. His dogs, who had passed away, were draped over his sled, and Evans himself was pulling it. The antitoxin was passed on to Tommy Patsy, who departed within half an hour. And Patsy left the Yukon River area and traveled south and picked up the Kaltag Portage, which, if you follow this west, will take you to the coast, right towards Nome, which is exactly where they needed to go.
Home stretch.
Here, Jack Nikolai, also known as Jack Screw, picked up the serum and followed the portage to Old Woman Cabin, and then passed the serum off to Victor Anagik, who took the portage till its end in Norton Sound. Norton Sound is where the Bering Sea and the Yukon River meet, and the sound being part of the inlet where the waters come together. Miles, and this is another name, I'm so sorry, Ganye? It's Gonangnan.
Okay.
All right, so Miles was next to take the serum, and he intended to take a shortcut across the ice that covered the sound. But as he was waiting for the serum to arrive, he started to see signs of a storm approaching. The storm could potentially cause the ice across the sound to break, and in turn would doom anyone crossing the ice. The ice of the Norton Sound is less stable because storms will push ice from the Bering Sea into the sound, which would result in cracks, breakups, and pile-ups of ice. Deciding that it was too much of a risk with the storm, Miles took hold of the serum at 5:30 a.m. on January 31st, and he headed for the hills. The whiteout conditions that he experienced was soon blowing the snow so hard that he could not see the wheel dogs in front of him. And he also described it as if running through a river of snow. So like,
An avalanche, he means?
no, but I mean, you know how like when you're walking through water, like your feet disappear and certain things disappear under the surface? That's what I imagine is what he was talking about, is that there was a layer of snow blowing so hard that it was, and so thick that like he looked down and he couldn't see his feet, type of a thing.
That would be intense.
The winds caused the temperatures to plummet to a wind chill temperature of negative 70 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 57 degrees Celsius. At 3 p.m., Miles arrived in Shaktoolik, and here Leonard Seppala, who was a Norwegian sled dog trainer and musher, was chosen for the 630-mile or 1,014 kilometer round trip from Nome to Nulato. So Nulato was the center of the meeting point for the dog sled relay. Nome was the destination that they needed to get the serum to.
Wait.
So he started in Nome,
Yeah.
was meant to go to Nulato, and then turn around and go back to Nome.
600 miles?
Correct.
He went the same distance as everybody else? All the other people?
He was going, everyone else was only going one way. He was going two.
So he was going to get it and then come back.
Correct. And everyone else was just
Was there
relaying
no one in
there.
between?
So at the time that he left Nome, he was under the impression that he was doing the whole thing. They ended up adding people in after he left, but there wasn't a consistent way to tell people because, you know, cell phones didn't exist and relay messages
It's
were
Alaska?
inconsistent, which we will talk about also. So he was chosen because he had previously made the run from Nulato to Nome in 4 days, which is very fast. Seppala had also won the All-Alaskan sweepstakes 3 times and had become famous for his athletic ability and rapport with his dogs. His lead dog, 12-year-old Togo,
12 years old.
was equally famous for his leadership,
Oh my gosh.
intelligence, and ability to read the room and forecast, as he was able to sense dangerous storms and would alert Seppala before anyone else could. Seppala would be going the bulk of the miles, but when the serum arrived in Shaktoolik, Seppala was not yet there. So Henry Ivanov was waiting just in case. Seppala and his dogs were basically coming through the same storm that Miles had run into, and he was slightly confused. He thought that he had several miles left and didn't realize that he was as close to Shaktoolik as he actually was. So as he took the shortcut across Norton Sound and heading into Shaktoolik, he ended up seeing a pileup of dogs and kind of sort of was like, what is going on here? So Ivanov's team takes the serum and sets off. I'm not entirely sure what the intention was of Ivanov taking the serum. I didn't know if he was hoping to run into Seppala in between the stations, if he was just going to take it the whole way, if, you know...
Got to keep it going.
Yeah,
You're on a time limit. So.
Yes, but like the actual intent of his leaving is unclear. So he was roughly half a mile from Shaktoolik, had just left, and Ivanov's lead dog had a major squirrel moment when a herd of reindeers crossed their path
Rudolph!
and his dog decided to chase after them. So the rest of the dogs then became super confused, collided with a reindeer, and got tangled up. So during this, Sapala was, much closer to Shaktulik than he realized. So he was pushing his dogs really hard, and he sees this tangle up and just happens to hear Ivanov yelling at him, the serum, I've got it here. So basically,
They must have not seen the red nose.
they crossed the same path at the same time. I mean, if Sapala would have been a quarter of a mile in either direction,
It's very crazy that they were so close.
yeah, he would have completely missed
It's
Ivanov.
destiny.
Yeah. I mean, it worked out very well.
Well, honestly, the thing that is surprising to me is like literally only one person needed to like die or have like an accident, which is probably very likely in a very dangerous place like Alaska. So the more people you get involved, the more likely that is possible. So the fact that they've had like 6 or 7 people touching this over dangerous terrain is a feat
Yeah.
that no one just like disappeared.
For sure.
So
Yes. Yeah, and I think you literally made the same point that I was making in the next paragraph, in that everyone was exactly where they needed to be and doing the job that they needed to do. And I mean, there are several instances where we don't know what would have happened to the serum if things didn't happen the way that they did. And there was a very real possibility that it wasn't going to make it.
it would have happened how all of our episodes happen. They would have looked in the wrong place, and the serum would have been in the place it wasn't supposed to be, because they would have gone lost and off the path.
Yeah. Which was happening because there was a major storm blowing through at the same time that this was occurring. Anyways, Sapala stood momentarily with Ivanov as Ivanov was untangling his dogs, and Ivanov shared that the cases were worsening. So when Sapala left Nome, there were only 2 confirmed cases, and days later, Ivanov shared that there were now 27 confirmed cases. And in addition to this, multiple children had died. Sapala took the serum and immediately turned around. With the worsening cases in mind, Sapala decided not to stop and retrace his route across the 20 miles or 32 kilometers of exposed open ice of the Norton Sound. So they didn't go out onto the ice. They kind of went around on the land to the next roadhouse, which was at Isaac's Point. And this was like the sound is like almost funnel shaped as it comes towards the Yukon River. So he like passed that point of the Yukon River and got to the other side of it. And this is where that roadhouse was. And in one day, they had traveled a total of 84 miles or 134 kilometers. And here at Isaac's Point, they took a few hours to rest and then set off again at 2 a.m. in the full power of the storm.
They? Are you referring to his dogs?
Sapala and his dog sled
Okay.
team, yes. During the night, the temperatures dropped to negative 40 degrees Celsius, which is
That's a
also,
breeze after that minus 70.
It's true.
It's like summer.
Negative 40 degrees Celsius is also negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which I know I've mentioned before on this podcast, but if you haven't listened to that
Fun
episode,
fact.
there you go. The wind increased to at least 65 miles per hour or 105 kilometers per hour, and the winds were so loud that Sapala was unable to hear if any of the ice was cracking. So he now was back on Norton Sound to get through the second half of that portion of the sound. And this next part seems unbelievable, but I saw a couple sources document it, and so I'm going to leave it in. Believe what you will.
I will be able to determine if this is unbelievable or not.
Okay. One moment, they were moving just fine across the ice, and the next, the dogs were halting due to a crack. And here, Sapala realized that he was now stranded on an ice floe. Sapala acted quickly and tied a line to Togo and then tossed him about 5 feet tossed him the 5 feet that separated their ice floe from, again, solid ice. Sapala applied the brakes of the sled into the ice and allowed Togo to pull the ice floe the distance to return the team to solid ice.
I mean, that's not horribly unrealistic, because like it's floating on water, so it's not going to be as heavy,
yes,
as you might think it is.
Well, so I actually de-dramatized it.
Oh.
The sources that I saw, I think, probably like took their own little liberty with it. One of the sources said that the line that he had tied to Togo snapped, and Togo thought quickly and grabbed the line and then turned around and like hooked it over his shoulders and pulled it. Like, and I was
Oh
like,
no, that's not happening.
I don't know that I believe that much. I would believe that the dog did pull them to safety, but I don't know. Maybe it did. Maybe it did happen. And Togo's the most incredible dog that the world will ever know. Except for the dog that's probably laying at your feet, all of my dog-loving listeners. But
your dog is great and so smart.
it's fantastic. It would do exactly what Togo did for you. I do think that there were some writing liberties that were taken with that particular part of the story. I'm not dismissing that it happened, but we also were not there. This was 100 years ago.
Indeed.
So, they now had just a little bit more of Norton Sound to cover, but they stayed close to the shoreline, and Togo picked his way carefully.
Yeah, after that incident.
For sure. He picked his way carefully until they were back on solid ground. Here they paused for a few hours where Sapala fed the dogs seal blubber and salmon. And the sheer amount of care and training that Sapala poured into all of his dogs was clear based on their incredible endurance and drive to perform well for him. After resting, they crossed Little McKinley Mountain, which is 1,200 feet in elevation or 370 meters. And this is another difficult part of the route because of the ridges that needed to be covered in order to cross the peak. The total elevation climbed in that particular 8-mile or 13-kilometer section is 5,000 feet or 1,500 meters.
It's a lot.
After descending to the next roadhouse in Golovin, Sapala learned that there was concern. Now he learned that there was concern over him going the entire distance, so additional teams were set up to take the serum the remainder of the way. Sapala passed the serum to Charlie Olson on February 1st at 3 p.m. When all was said and done, Sapala and his team traveled a total of 264 miles.
So he was going to travel 600 miles.
Yes. On February 1st, the number of cases in Nome rose one more to 28, and the serum en route was sufficient to treat 30 children.
What's the population of this place?
The population in Nome in 1925 was 1,400 people, including
Holy moly.
455 Alaskan natives and 975 European settlers. This was a significant decrease from its peak population of 20,000 during the gold rush.
Okay, so Gold Rush Town.
Yes.
Interesting.
Okay, so the serum en route was sufficient to treat 30 children. With the powerful blizzard raging and winds of 80 miles per hour or 130 kilometers per hour, Dr. Welch ordered a stop to the relay until the storm could pass. His reasoning was that a delay was better than the risk of losing all of it. Due to some confusion on the timing and the route, the messages were received but never relayed to the active mushers. Olson was blown off of the trail due to the storm, and he needed to go around deep snowdrifts, and he suffered frostbite to his hands while putting blankets on his dogs. The wind chill was negative 70 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 57 degrees Celsius, and he arrived in Bluff on February 1st at 7 p.m. in bad condition. Here, the serum was handed off to Gunnar Kassin, who decided to wait out the storm to see if it would break. But at 10 p.m., the storm only got worse, and he knew the drifts would soon block the trail, so he departed directly into the storm. And this is where Balto comes in. Balto led the team along with a second lead dog named Fox. The winds were so bad that the whiteout conditions resulted in Kassin being unable to see the dogs closest to his sled. Kassin traveled through the night through drifts and river overflow and traveled over the 600-foot or 183-meter Topkok Mountain. He was 2 miles or 3 kilometers past Solomon before he realized that he completely blew past the checkpoint and decided to just keep going. At this point, the winds became so strong that his sled flipped over, and when it did, the serum was dislodged and became buried in the snow.
Oh no!
Kassin had to remove his gloves to be able to feel for the cylinder of serum, and as a result, suffered frostbite to his fingers and hands. Kassin reached point safety ahead of schedule on February 2nd at 3 a.m. due to the fact that he did not stop in Solomon. And here, Ed Rorn, who was the next person in the relay and had received the message that the relay was paused, believed that Kassin had already been halted in Solomon, so he was sleeping. Since the weather was improving and it would take extra time for Ron's team to prepare, Kassin made the decision to continue on.
By himself? This guy?
Yeah. He continued.
I was honestly, out of all this, I'm surprised that this is the first guy that's just been like, I'm an Alaskan native. I am Superman. I can do it.
You're going to take too long.
Yeah, pretty much.
Balto, let's go.
I'm surprised that this is only happening now. I thought the other people would just like, oh, he's sleeping, I'm going to go instead.
Well, I think something that I think from my experience normally happens is that when you have large time-consuming projects starting, everybody's working hard to do exactly what they're supposed to do at exactly the right time. But as things kind of like trickle on and continue on, people start to, I don't want to say slack off, but
they lose focus.
Things just kind of fall apart naturally. And somebody has to step up, and it was Balto. So Balto and the other dogs on the team were doing well, so Kassin decided to take the remaining 25 miles or 40 kilometers to Nome, reaching Front Street at 5:30 a.m. Not a single vial of antitoxin was broken, and it was thawed and ready to use by noon. And the crazy thing to me, again, there was only enough serum to treat 30 children.
How many got infected?
I mean, at
30.
There was 28 at one point. A few of them died. But if you had 32 children at that point in time that the serum arrived, you would have to pick which kids get it and which kids don't. And then that also might mean that the epidemic that you're trying to prevent still happens.
Triage.
So Moving on, together the teams covered 674 miles in 127 and a half hours. And this is considered to be a world record since it was done in extreme sub-zero temperatures and during blizzard conditions. A number of dogs died during the trip. I think while I was doing my research, I was able to confirm 5, but I don't know that that is accurate. So the death toll from diphtheria, which had also been known as the Alaskan Black Death in Nome, is listed somewhere between 5 and 7, depending on what source you look at. And 19 became severely ill, and the antitoxin saved their lives. And an additional 150 were under surveillance due to minor symptoms.
We live in an amazing time.
Modern medicine is so cool. All of the mushers received letters of commendation from President Calvin Coolidge, which is basically a letter expressing gratitude for their incredible act that they performed. The H.K. Milford Company presented each of the mushers with a gold medal, and then Balto began to be celebrated. Kaysen and his team of dogs became celebrities and toured the West Coast from February 1925 to February 1926, and they starred in a 30-minute film called Balto's Race to Nome. A statue of Balto was erected in New York City's Central Park in December of 1925.
This also frustrates me that the person that gets famous is the one that literally didn't listen.
You want to get into my theory now as to why Balto
Yeah.
is the star? Because he's the one who showed up with it. Because the news stations
That's the easiest. Yeah.
and the photographers who were able to absorb the full impact of what just happened, they were able to connect it with their eyes on Balto.
Well, yeah, everybody else
And
just went back to work.
You can't understand the sacrifices and the amount of time and the amount of effort that were put in by the other people without visually seeing it. It's hard to grasp what they did. And I think because it is difficult to grasp, the stories that were set out were the ones that was the easiest to grasp, which was, of course, Balto arriving with the serum. A statue was then erected in New York City's Central Park of Balto on December 15th of 1925. And after this, things become quite sad. After the tour, Kaysen decided he wanted to return home to Alaska, but lacked the funds to get himself and his dogs back home. So it was then he sold the dogs, including Balto. Balto and the other dogs later became a part of a sideshow, or essentially what it looks like to me is a circus without exotic animals. And they lived in horrible conditions until they were rescued by George Kimball, who organized a fundraising campaign by the children of Cleveland, Ohio.
Yay.
On March 19th of 1927, the dogs received a hero's welcome as they arrived at their permanent home at the Cleveland Zoo. Because of his age, Balto was euthanized in 1933 at 14 years old, and he was then mounted and placed on display in the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. And Balto, unlike how he was depicted in the animated movie, was not, in fact, part wolf. A DNA sample was taken from his preserved body, and it was determined that he shares DNA with Siberian Huskies and sled dogs of Greenland, which is a large husky-type breed. In October of 1926, Sapala took Togo and his team on a tour from Seattle to California and then across the Midwest to New England, and he drew crowds no matter where he went. Sapala would eventually partner with Elizabeth Riker in Poland Spring, Maine, where many of his dogs went to live in retirement, and they contributed to the breeding program of Siberian sled dogs that they held strict standards for.
That's crazy. So they're bred in Maine and then they're sent to Alaska?
Yeah.
Or wherever they're needed, but
Yeah.
Maine just seems very far.
It does. I agree. So Togo fathered several litters, and Sapala visited Togo and was by his side when he was euthanized in 1929 at the age of 16.
That's so old.
After his death, Sapala had Togo preserved and mounted, and today his display is at the Iditarod Museum in Wasilla, Alaska. None of the mushers received the same degree of attention, though Wild Bill briefly toured with Blackie. The media largely ignored Alaskan native mushers, who covered 2/3 of the distance to Nome, and according to Edgar Calland, it was just an everyday occurrence as far as we are concerned.
Sounds about right.
Which I think is a great
It's
reminder
a very
that
Alaskan thing to say. They just live in a different place.
yeah, you have to do different things when you, I mean, it's hard to fathom, you know, being in 2024, it's hard to fathom getting anywhere without the use of a car.
In America, yes.
Yeah. Yes. And especially using dogs that many people view as a actual part of their family that, you know, gets their own special food bowl and sleeps on their own bed. And it's hard to imagine having a dog that has a job and needs to have, you know, boundaries put in place so that way they can do their job. And that's a reality probably still in Alaska, where sometimes you just can't get through the road. I mean, technology is cool. It's definitely increased the accessibility throughout Alaska.
I think
sure
that's the right word, but nature is a force. So
yeah. And sometimes you just got to fight nature with nature, and dogs are part of nature.
fight, yes. That's a good way to say that.
Fight through nature with nature. And hope you don't freeze your hands to your handlebars.
Or your tongue.
There's no way my tongue will get frozen to anything. My tongue will not be exiting my body.
I don't know, you stick your tongue out at me all the time. So.
We live in Ohio.
The Christmas Story is from Ohio.
Yeah, from several years ago. We barely get winter anymore.
Yeah.
But apparently it's supposed to be a hard winter this year, according to my dad.
We have him on camera.
We do.
He put the date timestamp in there and everything.
He did. All right. Thank you for joining me, Sam. And thank you for listening to all of my lovely listeners. And
Pet your dogs for us.
pet your dogs. Come back next week. We're going to talk about more dog things. So, or not next week, 2 weeks. It's in 2 weeks. We're going to talk about more dog things. It'll be a short episode, and I'm sorry for that, but we had to get through this history to get to the meat of what goes on in the next story. So,
Indeed.
thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please take a moment to rate and subscribe from wherever you listen to Tragedy with a View. To get access to ad-free episodes, bonus content, and more, please join us on our Patreon. The link will be in the show notes. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And to share a story of your own, send us a campfire confessional email at tragedywithAview@gmail.com. We'll see you next time.